Who you represent?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Leili Fatehi, and I represent Friends of the Mississippi River, a leading citizen-based organization that works to protect and enhance the Mississippi River and its watershed. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today about our concerns with House File 1433. This bill, both by itself and when looked at in conjunction with the many other rulemaking bills that have been heard this session, is an attempt at something that I've taken to calling deregulation by overregulation. In the past, we've seen bills that seek to speed up and to reduce the requirements of rulemaking so that regulated entities get to an answer faster and with fewer hurdles. This bill, however, takes a very interesting approach to solving this challenge in that it imposes massive, time-consuming, and expensive hurdles that an agency must go through, not only to adopt a rule, but even to just propose a rule. And then it makes it so that even after going through all of those hurdles, the rule still has to be enacted by law. The bill is dense and complex in a way that I think serves the proponents' goals of obfuscating what the bill in its totality does. And what it does is add multiple layers of and mechanisms for obstructing the ability of agencies to develop and implement rules for protecting our environment and natural resources, our health, and our welfare. And while I think the specifics of the bill deserve attention, we'd be here all day if I went through them one by one. So I'm just going to describe kind of the bottom line of what the bill does from our perspective. The bill gives individual legislative committees unchecked authority to block an agency from adopting or from even holding public hearings for proposed rules. This bill short circuits the very mechanisms created by the legislature in the Administrative Procedures Act to ensure that there's public transparency and accountability of agency decision making, including transparency and accountability for proposed actions. It concerns me that this bill could create an incentive for agencies to avoid formally proposing rules and encourage them instead to conduct their deliberations about proposed actions in a manner that's more under the radar and less visible to the public and the legislature in order to avoid triggering some of the provisions in this bill. And I certainly don't mean to imply that our current agency's leadership would do that, but the legislature, in passing the Administrative Procedures Act, clearly saw it in their wisdom to account for the possibility and significance of this to the public trust. The bill also imposes requirements that the economic impacts of proposed rules be assessed, and it goes further. It mandates that that calculation of economic impact include a lengthy list of increasingly more remote and unrelated costs, but then also says that it must exclude even the most direct economic benefits that a proposed rule may propose, which, for example, in the context of the environment would include things like cleanup and remediation savings, more valuable environmental services, increased property values, growth in tourism and outdoor recreation, et cetera, et cetera. The bill then uses these skewed economic impacts to trigger requirements for additional reviews and approvals that both delay and add millions of dollars of expense to the rulemaking process. If the agency's determination of the cost of the rule isn't high enough to trigger these requirements, the bill also creates mechanisms that guarantee that it can be triggered anyway, but provides no guidelines for when and how such an override would be determined as appropriate. And then those inevitably triggered requirements, they include a review by a 5-person peer review panel that's convened by the legislative auditor that's charged with determining the soundness of the proposed rule's scientific, technical, and economic basis. However, there are no qualifications or expertise required for being appointed to such a panel other than a one-sided exclusion of those with even an indirect knowledge of the agency's work. No exclusion on any knowledge or relationship with a regulated entity. And yet this panel is supposed to assess scientific, technical, and economic soundness all of which are issues that typically we would assume require some expertise. And then finally, the bill provides that a proposed rule requiring such a panel, regardless of, even if it goes through the panel and it comes out with flying colors, it can't take effect anyway until it's approved and enacted as law by the legislature. So in short, the bill allows for a single legislative committee to make it so that, first, a proposed rule never gets a public hearing. Second, that it can't avoid the delay and expense of a biased and non-expert peer review. And then finally, that it can't get enacted except as law by the legislature. What's unclear to me is what the point is of going through all these rulemaking delays and reviews and other things that are created by this bill just to get to the point of having the legislature pass a law. The legislature could just pass the law without spending millions of taxpayer dollars on this process that has no justification. I think perhaps the only part of the bill that clearly demonstrates what this bill is all about is Section 2, which amends the language of the state's regulatory policy statement to make, quote, maximum flexibility for the regulated party the absolute non-comparative condition and goal for agency rulemaking and regulation. So I urge you to take the time to unpack what it is that this bill is doing and ask yourself whether you really think that the best way to deal with reining in the cost and delay of rulemaking is to expand the cost and the delay and force it to collapse under its own weight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think what we're going to do is we're going to hear from the